Good evening. Thank you for tuning in to Face to Face. I'm your host, Dennis Ward. Our guest this week is award-winning graphic novelist David Alexander Robertson. Growing up in Winnipeg, Robertson never learned about his Indigenous culture and heritage in school, but he's trying to make sure that is not the case for the next generation. He has close to 20 titles under his belt. All can be used as teaching tools in the classroom. He tackles heavy subjects such as residential schools, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and suicide, and all in a medium he feels appeals to the youth. David Alexander Robertson joins us now. David, thanks for taking the time to join us. You've authored nearly 20 graphic novels already and books. A little maybe on what's inspired you to start writing and to use graphic novels as that medium.
Right. So, what got me to start writing the stuff that I do is really a lot to do with how I grew up. Not necessarily in the family environment, because I was raised really well, but my school experience as an Indigenous person growing up in River Heights here in Winnipeg. You're relying on all these outside sources to teach you about who you are as much as you do in your family. And in school, I didn't learn anything about who I was as an Indigenous person. We didn't learn anything about culture, community, history, anything like that. So by the time I was an adult, I felt really disconnected from who I was as an Indigenous person. I didn't really understand it. And so as a writer, and I've been writing since I was in grade 3, it was looking at really how I could change that for other youth coming through the school system, how I could educate kids in the classroom, because my parents were both educators. So I started to just write with the intent of educating in Indigenous issues, whether it's culture, our place in Canadian history, Indigenous peoples. And so the graphic novels came in because I was looking at the best way to engage with kids. So the best way to get them excited about learning. Because certainly for me in school, like learning history was not something I was ever really jacked for. So I wanted to get kids excited about history, which can be tough. I still remember I had a friend who was always interested in history in school, and I used to tease him about it. And now I write history books. So I found that graphic novels were the best way to do that. And I always ask kids in schools now, I say, what would you rather learn from? If you had a comic book in front of you, and if you had a textbook in front of you, what would you rather learn from? And they always raise their hand for the comic book. So it's really exciting for them to learn. So that's really what got me into doing the kind of books that I do is what way can I best engage with and get kids to retain the most information about these issues that are really important to me.
What do you think it is about the graphic novel that gets youth into these types of issues, some of the issues that you take on?
Yeah, so they're very versatile. So there's a couple of reasons why they work so well. One of them is, probably the most obvious reason is that they have this kind of cool factor to them, where you see them a lot in popular media right now, whether it's in movies or TV shows that are being adapted from comics and graphic novels. So the kids get excited because they're a cool thing to learn in the classroom. But I think cool can only go so far. They have to have like an educational merit to them. So I think what really happens with a graphic novel is that the existence of the words and the images together. So they kind of shoulder the burden of educating together, and they help kids to engage more with the material and to retain more information from them. So in that way, they become a really effective educational tool. And the other thing is, too, one comic book can reach a wide audience. So it's used in various levels in the education system. For example, the first book I did, the Helen B. Osborne graphic novel, I've been to a grade 4 classroom to talk to kids about it. I've been to middle years, senior years, and I've also guest lectured at a university about it. And I don't think there's a lot of kind of literature that can do that. So there's a lot of benefits to it other than just being a cool medium in an educational setting.
Your novels come with teaching guides as well. Have you had much success? You mentioned some of the speeches you've given. Have you had much success getting them into the classroom?
Yeah, I think they've been really successful. That's kind of the niche that I've been able to hit. And that's great because, if they were only in classrooms and libraries, I would be happy with that. I've been excited to see that they've done well outside of the classroom, but I think the primary audience for a lot of my books have been in the classroom, in schools, at various levels, and in libraries. And I've seen it firsthand. So you know, I'll get like, you know, reports from my publisher on, you know, this school's buying them, this, you know, this division's buying them, and that's great. But seeing it firsthand in the classroom, when I've been, you know, going to schools, speaking to kids, at different grade levels, interacting with kids, you know, talking to assemblies, inside of Winnipeg, outside of Manitoba, that's where I've really seen it. And not only just like seeing that they're being used, but seeing how effective they've been in teaching kids, because the level of engagement, the stuff that they ask me, the things that they answer, the questions that I ask of them, they really understand the issues, and they become articulated in the issues, and that's really what I wanted to get from the book. So that's been really encouraging for me to see them being used in that setting.
As someone who says they didn't learn, you know, any Indigenous history or culture while they were in school, what does it mean for you now to be able to go into the classroom and see these youth looking at your books, reading your novels?
You know, I love to see it because, again, like when I was going through school, I see that I think about this. I wish that I had resources like this when I was growing up, because, you know, by the time I was in high school, I felt a lot of shame being an Indigenous person because of the things that I had heard in the classroom, through sports, in the community. There was this really negative perception of Indigenous peoples, and I learned that too. And so as an Indigenous person, that was really confusing for me. So, you know, when I was thinking about doing these books, as I said, like thinking about what would have been different for me, but also what would have been different for non-Indigenous kids, and how they would have learned, and what that effect would have had on the, you know, their views on Indigenous peoples and how they manifested those views. So, you know, you can't go back, but in moving forward, seeing them used in the classroom and seeing kids learning the things that they're learning, I think that it contributes in some small way to us moving forward together. And this is all, I think this is all reconciliation. It's gathering knowledge, it's being able to share knowledge and have discussions with each other, and working towards fixing this relationship. And so to me, that's what I get most excited about in seeing the books being used in this way.
You tackle a lot of tough issues. Have you had any issues, you know, publishing them, getting these novels out to the public and out to youth?
So, yeah, the book, I deal with a lot of difficult stuff in the books. I mean, I've addressed the residential school system, missing and murdered Indigenous women, and so they're tough subjects to tackle. I think keeping in mind that the grade level that you're aiming to educate, you need to be cognizant of the appropriateness of the material. So how you address the material is very important for the age group. You can teach the residential school system to a younger learner. It's just that you need to be mindful of what you're teaching and how you're teaching it to them. And if you're giving them enough information beforehand, and if you're following up with more information afterwards with a dialogue with them. But you know, I think that there's teachers are starving for resources that they can use in the classroom to support the education. And I think publishers recognize that too. So I think if the material's there, if it's relevant, and if it's high quality material, like if it's high quality literature, if you have that and there's relevance to the stuff that you're teaching, I think it gets easier to see your work published and being used in the classroom. I mean, it's tough to get published, but I think if you're looking at what the need is, I think that you're going in the right direction.
How important is it for you, these graphic novels, to work with the right illustrator?
Oh, it's really important. I mean, you know, I say to kids all the time, they get a kick out of it, but like, you know, I can't draw. So, I mean, I'm a terrible artist. I have 3 daughters, and I have learned through them how to draw Dora the Explorer. And I can do that. I can draw a really good Dora, but that's about it. So I need to work with really talented people to be able to bring that work into a place that is ready to be digested by students in a way that they can be excited about it and engaged with. So, you know, if I drew it, they wouldn't do very well. I probably wouldn't be here today. But I work with, you know, people like Scott Henderson, who are incredibly talented, Julie Flett, who make my work look good. And that's really important. You know, when I write them, I have a vision for how I want things to look. And the illustrators I've worked with, I've been lucky enough for them to take that stuff out of my head and to kind of make it look oftentimes even better than I had imagined. So that's really important to me.
We're speaking here with award-winning author David Robertson. We'll continue the conversation after this short break.
If a story is uncomfortable, would you change it? No, you wouldn't, because there's no power in holding back. Stories have the power to change lives, so true storytellers uncover every side of hunger, of families, water, shelter, and health. So we're going to tell your stories every day until issues transform and our communities transform with them.
Welcome back. Our guest this week on Face to Face is award-winning author David Alexander Robertson. And David, some of your work, as we mentioned, touches on some very heavy issues in terms of the residential school system, missing and murdered Indigenous women. Why are these issues that you've wanted to take on and get out to your audience?
So there are a couple of issues in this country that are really important to me. And I feel like they are things that all Canadians should be aware of and they should know. And part of that work is done in the education system. You know, as we prepare kids to go out into their lives after school, we need to equip them with knowledge. And so, you know, the residential school system, as an example, all kids should be able, all adults, all kids should be able to articulate the history. And not only that, they should be able to have a dialogue about it. And I think that goes a long way. You know, and, you know, in Germany, every single person there, I think it's probably mandatory that they learn about the Holocaust. And the residential school system is, to me, one of the defining moments in our history as a country. We should know about it. And I'm surprised that there's still a lot of Canadians who don't. They might have heard about it, but they don't know really what happened. They don't know what started it. They don't know the impacts of it. And to me, that's vitally important. And so there's that. And in missing and murdered Indigenous women, this is an epidemic in our country that is affecting everybody. And it's something that all Canadians should be concerned with. It's not an Indian problem. It's a Canadian problem. And if we have thousands of women who have been murdered or gone missing in this country, it's something that we should know about it. And the more people know about it, like I always come back to education. If everybody knows about it and is sharing knowledge about it, we'd be far closer to overcoming the epidemic than we are now. And so these are issues that are very important to me. And the fact that I have 3 daughters, and I am concerned about the world that they're growing up in because they're Indigenous, I shouldn't have to be concerned about that. I should be more looking forward to the stuff that they're going to be doing that I can be excited about. You know, I remember this recently. My daughter took a bus to her swimming lesson, her first swim team, and she didn't call us when she got to the pool. My wife and I were texting with each other, and we were like, "Did you hear from her?" And I said, "No, did you?" "No." And the likelihood is that she just forgot to call. But there was that thing in the back of my mind saying, "What if?" Because she's an Indigenous girl. And so I drove across the city just so I could see her swimming in the pool, just so I could know that she was okay. I shouldn't have to do that. And the work that I'm doing now, and I hope that a lot of people are doing, like, you know, Isque, who does a lot of music on this issue, Nobody Knows is a great song that addresses it. The more people that are concerned with the epidemic and they're doing their part, and sometimes the part is just sharing knowledge, the closer we'll be to overcoming it. So these issues are probably the 2 most important issues to me, and they should be to most Canadians, I think.
On that issue, you've written 2 graphic novels now on the murder of Helen Betty Osborne. Why is that a tragedy that you've come back to for a second time?
Well, you know, she's really the first face of the epidemic, missing and murdered Indigenous women. And when I wrote about her story the first time, it was because I saw in her story the ability to educate people on a number of different issues. Missing and murdered Indigenous women, yes. But also, you know, she was a residential school survivor. She went to Guy Hill Residential School in Nepal. She encountered racism in Nepal, segregation, and also following her death, the justice system's failure, and the resulting inquiry into her murder and the murder of J.J. Harper. So her story is really unique in that it enables us to teach a number of different issues. What's not unique about her is that she's one of over 4,000 women who have been murdered or gone missing in this country. So when I revisited her story, I was concentrating solely on her being a missing and murdered Indigenous woman in this country and trying to impart on Canadians who read the story their responsibility to learn about the epidemic and to share knowledge on it. And the last real scene in that book is share, you know. And sometimes it's as easy as clicking on a story and sharing it with your 100 or 1,000 followers. And that does a lot of good. We may not see it. My dad says the stuff that we're trying to change now, we may not see the result of it in our lifetimes, but if we're doing the good work in a good way, it'll happen. And we have to have the long view of sharing this knowledge and overcoming these things. And I think that goes a long way. And Betty's story is an avenue through which we can do that.
You updated it for the second time, kind of bringing it into the 21st century. Why was that important to bring in, you know, the internet age?
Well, I mean, it's the time we're living in now. It's how we share knowledge in a lot of ways. It's how we share with each other. It's how we communicate. So that was important. I wanted to also revisit her story to take another look at it against this epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. I wanted to update some of the artwork. I wanted to take another crack at telling the story a little more effectively now that I was a more seasoned writer. So it was a little bit of that, and it was also a little bit of wanting to take a different angle on the story and modernize it against the epidemic so that we can try to share more knowledge about it so that more Canadians know about it.
Your latest book, which we have here, When We Were Alone, a children's book, you know, going from some heavy themes to a children's novel. Why was that something that you wanted to get into?
So a couple reasons. One of them was I have 5 children. And so as much as I've done a number of other kinds of writing, like, you know, TV, novels, graphic novels, I've always wanted to be able to read them a children's book that I've written. So there's always a little bit of that. Like, I just thought it would be fun to do that. The problem for me is I always need to have a purpose in what I'm doing. Like, I can't just write something for fun, really. I always need to be able to see what I can educate people on through the writing that I'm doing. So when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came out with their final report, and one of their calls to action was that the residential school history needs to be taught as early as kindergarten and all the way through school. And again, like, I saw that there was like a small amount of resources that were there for teachers to bring this history to a kindergarten student. So that was the connection for me. Was I said, okay, I'm going to write a children's book that will be a tool for teachers. And so out of that really came When We Were Alone. So it's something that I think that from K to grade 3, I hope to see in a lot of classrooms across the country. But honestly, this is a book that parents will learn from too. Like, it's not just for the education system, it's for a parent to read to a kid. And that's where really the magic of knowledge happens, is that interaction between, like, a parent reading it together with a child and then discussing it afterwards. And it addresses the residential school system in a way that's age appropriate as well. So these are really innocent but important conversations that we can have with children. And this is just a Kickstarter for it. And so that was really important for me to do with this book.
When We Were Alone is pretty fresh. It's not that old. It just came out recently, but you don't really sit back too much. What's up next for you?
Yeah, I mean, I always try to have something on the go. Sometimes I'm a little less busy than other times, but this year I have a lot on the go. I'm working right now on a supernatural young adult novel, so that's a change of pace for me, and I like to do that. Like, I like to challenge myself to do different kinds of writing. Novels, poetry, graphic novels, children's books, because I think it makes me better as a writer. So this is new for me, and I think too, like, there's some teachings in there, but it is a little bit more fun for me to be able to tackle something like that. So I have that on the go coming up. I have a follow-up to my novel, The Evolution of Alice, and that's fun too, because when you write characters that you really love, when you finish the novels, you kind of have to say goodbye to them, and it's kind of this bittersweet moment. So being able to revisit those characters and kind of just call them up and say, hey, how you doing? Let's hang out again. Like, that's fun. And then I have a bunch of graphic novels that I just did for Newfoundland that are on Indigenous peoples in the Newfoundland Labrador area. That's coming out in the spring. So I have all that kind of happening right now. So it's it's kind of a busy time for me.
For those interested in finding some of your work, where would be the best place to find that?
So you can go to Highwater Press, which is my publisher, and check out all the books that they have. Like, they have an amazing assortment of Indigenous literature, and they have all my books available online there as well. Or you can go to my website, just darobertson.ca, or follow me on Twitter. It's just Dave Alex Roberts, and I kind of tweet out stuff that I'm doing and stuff that I'm working on every now and then.
David Robertson, award-winning author, graphic novelist, we appreciate you joining us here on Face to Face. That's all the time we have for today, but we're always looking for new guests, so if you have any suggestions, please email us at news@aptn.ca. Thank you for tuning in to Face to Face. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks, David.
Thanks for having me.
If a story is uncomfortable, would you change it? No, you wouldn't, because there's no power in holding back. Stories have the power to change lives, so true storytellers uncover every side of hunger, of families, water, shelter, and health. So we're going to tell you our stories every day until issues transform and our communities transform with them.
Welcome back to Face to Face. Again, our thanks to David Alexander Robertson. Next week on the show, our guest will be opera singer Rhonda Head from the Opaskwayak Cree Nation in northern Manitoba. Here's a peek at some of our interview with her. So 18 years old, by the time you discover your voice, what was that first public performance like for you?
I didn't perform in public right away because when I started performing in public, it was 2001. When I went to school in Toronto, it was 1987. So all that time, I was taking voice lessons and studying voice, but I didn't feel confident to share my voice with anyone at that point in my life because of we grew up with it being impacted by residential school and our confidence is not as, it wasn't as high for me when I was 18 years old. So all that time I studied music and took lessons and learned technique to make my voice better. And I got sick with brain tumor, so I took a year off when I did get sick. And then in 2001, I sang O Canada and Cree at the Opaskwayak Cree Nation Blizzard hockey game. So that was the first time I shared my voice in public. And a lot of people approached me and they complimented my singing. And so I started gaining my confidence at that point, and I began to share my voice with the public.
That's all for today. We're always looking for new guests, so if you have any suggestions, please email us at news@aptn.ca. Thank you for tuning in to Face to Face. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night.